Okay, it's a couple minutes after, so we will go ahead and get started. So Dorian, I saw you there momentarily. Are you? Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you. Could you
Hi.
start with the introduction of CCF, please?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Dorian Traub. I'm from the Center for the Changing Family. I co-direct the center with Darby Saxby in psychology, and our amazing Melissa Reyes, who you get lots of communication from, is also on the Zoom with us. We are thrilled to have you here. The Center for the Changing Family focuses on caregiving across the lifespan. We are very fortunate to have over 65 faculty and student affiliates from across USC, and all of us focus on various aspects of caregiving. And today, Beth, who has been co-chairing our research committee, has put together an amazing symposium demonstration of some of the research that CCF has been supporting. So we are super grateful to Beth for both the work you've put into the center for us, and the amazing research that you do to support families who are caregiving.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, so Bridget leads the student committee. That may not be exactly the right name, I'm forgetting. But we work together on this. We will have a similar roundtable in a few weeks where it will be focused on student presentations. We do have a couple of students presenting today, but our goal here today, these are all funded grants funded by the CCF. And so we are very much looking forward to hearing about results of those projects. And then we'll have another opportunity for students to present coming up, which you will get more communication about. So I am going to keep time. So we have 6 presenters. Each presenter has 5 minutes to present, and then we have 3 minutes for questions and discussion. So I'll be letting you know when we have a minute left, both of the presentation and then a minute left of the 3 minutes for discussion. And I'm going to do my very best to keep us on time, and we will hopefully be able to have some nice discussion about the work and the time we've had. Okay, so Holly, if you are ready, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Hi everyone. It says host disabled. Could you let me share?
Okay, so Melissa's working on that.
Oh,
okay,
perfect.
Great.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Holly Bradley, and I am a postdoc in Dr. Beth Smith's Infant Neuromotor Control Lab over at CHLA. I've been a postdoc for about a year now. I moved here a year ago from University College London. I'm working on a few really exciting projects, and today I'm just going to talk about one of them, maternal perceived stress and infant behaviour during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I was awarded the USC Centre for the Changing Family Award last year, and the funds allowed me to travel and present the pilot work of this study at the International Congress of Infant Studies 2022. I got a lot of useful feedback, and then I came back with that feedback and collaborated with 5 other sites across the US on this project. And I've now written these results up in a manuscript, which is in peer review at the moment. And also I'm going to tell you more about that work today. So it has been found that maternal stress has negative consequences on infant behavioural development, and the COVID-19 pandemic presented a very uniquely stressful situation to mothers of infants born during the pandemic. So our hypothesis for this work was that mothers with higher levels of perceived stress during the COVID pandemic would report higher levels of infant regulatory problems, including excessive crying and interrupted sleep patterns. So just quickly, the methods that we did, this was a longitudinal study across 6 sites. You can see the sites that were involved here. We used 3 instruments for this study. The perceived stress scale, which is a self-report questionnaire made up of items designed to assess how overwhelming and unpredictable an individual's current life circumstances have been during the past month. A brief infant sleep questionnaire and an infant crying survey, which are both parental surveys on infant crying and sleep behaviours. We had 433 participants at 6 months of infant age and 344 at 12 months of infant age. So just to give you a quick overview of the results, in terms of the perceived stress scale, we found that maternal perceived stress stayed consistent at 6 and 12 months of infant age, with average score of 15 on the PSS, which classifies as a moderate stress level. For infant sleeping, we looked at 2 variables. The first one was the time taken to settle the infant in minutes. And we found that the time taken to settle the infant to bed had the same range and mean at 6 months as it did at 12 months. And maternal perceived stress was significantly and positively correlated with the time taken to settle the infant at both 6 and 12 months old. So the more stressed that the mother perceived herself to be, the longer it took for the infant to be settled at bedtime. Another variable that we looked at to do with infant sleeping was the longest uninterrupted sleep period. So we felt that these 2 variables gave us a nice overview of infant sleep habits. At 6 months of age, the longest uninterrupted sleep was on average 10 hours, and at 12 months, the longest uninterrupted sleep was also 10 hours. Maternal perceived stress was not significantly correlated with longest period of uninterrupted sleep at 6 or 12 months old. However, we did find that the time taken to put the infant to sleep and longest uninterrupted sleep period were significantly negatively correlated. So as maternal stress at 6 and 12 months did predict longer time to settle the infant, and these 2 variables are related, this may also relate to shorter periods of uninterrupted sleep in the infants, just potentially leading to an overall worse quality of sleep. And for infant crying, mothers were asked to report how often their baby fusses or cries, with answers ranging from 1, not at all, to 4, very much so. And maternal perceived stress was significantly positively correlated with the amount of crying and fussiness at 6 months of age, but not at 12 months of age. So overall, our results support that, in line with the hypothesis, mothers who reported high levels of perceived stress during the pandemic also reported high levels of regulatory problems in their babies. And this study is an important first step in identifying the correlates of maternal perceived stress during the pandemic and infant regulatory problems. How varying levels of maternal stress and infant behaviours relate to overall infant developmental status over time is an important next step. There was a couple of limitations with this study. We didn't have pre-pandemic data from all of the mothers, so we are not able to determine if perceived stress would change as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, the data are subjective, as there are maternal surveys, and there are likely to be other confounding variables affecting the stress and infant behaviour. So that was just a really quick overview. I think I just hit 5 minutes, perfect timing, I think. So thank you again for the award to letting me go to ICAS. And these are the authors on the submitted manuscript, which we have submitted to Paediatric Research. So we will keep you all posted on how that goes. So thank you.
Here's your 5 minutes. Excellent, well done. Excellent. So questions, if you want to go ahead and use the raise hand function, and we can questions, comments, discussion. Or I think we're a small enough group that you can go ahead and just speak up. Yes, Gabe.
Yeah, great, interesting data. Are you all looking to assess like any of the longitudinal associations? Like, does stress maybe during at 6 months predict infant behavior at 12 months? And yeah, are there any plans to move in that direction at all?
So I think we have this data and we're thinking about what we want to do with the next step. So I know a few of the other sites, Cedars-Sinai and NYU, are looking into different variables and looking at different outcomes at 6 and 12 months of age. So at the minute, we personally don't have any proposed plans to look into this. But I think this is why it's nice to talk about this research at things like this to get, ideas about how what else we could do with this data.
Yeah, I think that's a nice suggestion, Gabe. Thank you. I will say one of the things that makes this particular work a little bit challenging, this was a study that was designed, NYU as the lead site. It was put together very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic. And the idea was it was faster for each site to obtain IRB approval at their own site and collect the same variables. So now when we're doing analysis and we want to combine data across sites, every time we do that, we have to establish data use agreements across all of the sites. And anyone who's had to do that knows how long it takes. And so that's just unfortunately another limitation to the work, is establishing all of those data use agreements before we can proceed. Any other last questions?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that that's such an important point about how creative people were with their research at the start of the pandemic too. Of course, I mean, downstream there can be challenges, but I don't know that I would have thought that through that way. And so that's a really fascinating approach to me for each site to have collected their own data and agreed on what they were going to collect independently.
Yeah, it was a very creative way to get going quickly because time was of the essence. Like, we need to be collecting data now. And so that was the approach. So excellent. Okay, we are at 3 minutes, so we're going to move on. And Bobbi, you are our next presenter. Okay, looks great.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bobbi Pineda. I'm an assistant professor in the Chan division for occupational therapy. And I apologize, but it never fails. Like, whenever I'm needing to say something on a Zoom meeting, the gardener is outside with a really loud leaf blower. So hopefully it's not too cumbersome. But today I just wanted to start off by saying that I really appreciate the support for this project from CCF. It's really allowed us to collect a lot of really important information that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But as you'll see, we're still in process, so I don't have a lot of findings at this point. So as background, preterm infants are admitted to the NICU during a critical period of brain development. And when you take preterm infants, we know that they have high risk of a lot of developmental challenges later on. And so really trying to understand that developmental trajectory and factors that can improve it and factors that also impede it are really important targets for research so that we can change those things that are modifiable. But obtaining long-term developmental outcomes across time is a challenge. It's a challenge, for attrition purposes, but also it can be quite costly. And so we set out to really look at long-term developmental outcomes among preterm infants that were already enrolled in other prospective cohorts during my time at Washington University. So this was at St. Louis Children's Hospital, which is a large 132-bed level 4 NICU. So we really wanted to set out to try to understand all of those different factors. So medical factors, parental mental health, and all of the different things that can impact development across time. So some of our cohorts were actually enrolled prospectively back in 2007, so quite some time ago. So those are our 10 to 12-year-olds. And then some were as recent as 2018. And so those are the kids that are now around 3 to 5 years of age. And so what we did is came up with a comprehensive questionnaire to really target development at those specific ages. And so, for example, really understanding school readiness in the 3 to 5 and the 6 to 8 year level was really important. And then, of course, the 10 to 12-year-olds got different targets within the questionnaires themselves. So we set out to, again, do this questionnaire at the appropriate time. And the questionnaire contained all sorts of self-report questionnaires by the parents. These included the brief, the child behavior checklist, the sensory profile, the behavioral pediatrics feeding assessment, and then also feeding assessments, including the PD-EAT, assessments of the home environment, including the STEM-Q. We all know about the ages and stages questionnaire that helped us understand language, cognitive, and motor. Also some measures of parental stress, and then we looked at the Vinland 3. So to date, we've had 103 questionnaires that have been returned by parents. So 12 of them at 10 to 12 years, 58 at 5 to 7 years, and then 33 at 3 to 5 years. And then some of the important things that we've found just within a limited sample of 20 that we've been able to do some preliminary analyses on is that it does seem like there's a broad range of developmental challenges that these kids have at age 5 to 7 years, with 40% having a developmental delay. And then you can see also 10% having ADHD, and then some also having some sensory issues with hearing loss or visual difficulties.
In 1 minute left.
Thank you. And then also what we found in this limited sample of 20 is that 70% had, that most of them were actually doing pretty well in terms of executive functioning, with being in the 70th percentile. Only 3 or 15% of the whole sample had problems with feeding at 5 to 7 years of age. But then sensory processing really seemed to be a big problem. And so you can see that 40% had a definite difference. And then on the on the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, 30% had high, which is considered problematic. And so our future directions are to complete the questionnaires on all of the cohorts, and then to score them, of course, and then also to look at medical and social factors that relate to those developmental outcomes for targets for future interventions. So thank you again to CCF.
Thank you, Bobbi. That's really interesting. And it's so important to have the long-term follow-up data, and, very difficult to get questions for Bobbi. So do you have any, so Dorian says, thank you, and a well-designed study. Do you have any particular things that work well for keeping in touch with families over time?
Wow, so that's the big question, right? So this sample was in urban St. Louis, and so there we have about 80% of mothers can be single, about 70% on Medicaid, about 50% are African American or Black, and I think mixed within this population, the families tended to move a lot, which was really hard. So one strategy that we've realized is that just frequent checks into the medical record to try to keep track of where they're moving to is really important. And then as frequent contact as you can continue to have seems to allow us to be able to stay in touch. Because we're talking 10 to 12 years from one of the cohorts, which is a really long time.
Yeah, excellent. Stacy.
Thanks, Bobbi. Great talk. And I'm interested in how many of these kids are being followed as part of some of the national cohorts. So their follow-up visits are funded by, these bigger NIH funded or larger cohorts to follow them, or are they all in smaller intervention trials?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think none of them are in larger trials. Yeah.
But not in trials, but in the equivalent of the California CPQ stuff, that they're not involved in networks, or they're not in hospitals that collect data for the neonatal network?
Yeah, that is a good question, actually. So I want to say maybe they became members of the Children's Hospital Consortium, which is it's kind of like the Vaughan network, but the equivalent for level 4 NICUs. But I want to say that happened after they were born. Maybe the final cohort in 2018 would have been collected in that, but I'm not sure. Good question.
Okay. It would just give you such nice baseline medical data if they were, because you could link to that medical data if any of them were in those areas, to look at some of the challenges about follow-up is having their medical records from being in the NICU all the way kind of through. So if they were part of either the neonatal network or Vaughan or the Children's Hospital Consortiums, you might be able to get medical data, which would be really helpful.
Well, we have all of the medical data because they were all enrolled, most of them within the first couple of days of life. So we have all their medical information while they were in the NICU, and then also standardized neurobehavioral assessment as they approached term equivalent age and got discharged.
Great. So is your plan to look at then like the outcomes long-term related to based on what their baseline information looks like?
Yes. So seeing really if those early neurobehavioral assessments can predict outcome. And then hopefully the whole infusion of the social environment. Like, so even if you had some challenges detected at term equivalent age, can the social environment then impact the outcome later on?
Okay, thank you very much. And we will move on to Natalie, our next speaker.
Great. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I have to say I might be a little bit of the odd one in the group. I am primarily a clinician, so I'm not a big researcher, and I partnered here with Dr. Amy West, who is more of a researcher. So I'll be sharing a little bit more about our research pilot study that we have, and maybe a little bit more focused on some of the clinical work we are doing as well. So just to introduce myself, I am a clinical psychologist, a part of Project HEAL, which is our special trauma track in our mental health clinic at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And I'm also the mental health director for a clinic called La Linterna. This is an interdisciplinary clinic in Altamed at CHLA that is really focused on addressing the needs of our migrant children and families. So I started off with a partnership with a physician, Dr. John Harlow, over at CHLA, who also had a strong interest in working with this community. And our main focus was really targeting kind of the most vulnerable of our unaccompanied minors that are coming in to the US and settling it within the LA area after being released from detention centers and refugee centers. You know, there's really a lack of service that follows and provides support to these young children. And so we put together this clinic as a way to address needs. We've now partnered with an attorney from the USC Gold School of Medicine and social work students as well to provide case management support. And we're finding a huge high level of mental health need in this community. A lot of times youth experience traumatic events before, during, and after migration, increasing the risk of depression, anxiety, conduct problems, and even complex PTSD. And of course, there's so many barriers to accessing proper healthcare, both physical, medical, and mental health care, including cultural, linguistic barriers, but just also general distrust of systems. A lot of the youth settling into the area are coming from Mexico and many places in Central America, and even some areas in South America where there's been a lot of turmoil, a lot of lack of government protection against a lot of threats of harm towards them. And so, you know, building resilience, building a connection with this community is very important. And more research is pointing to the importance of positive relationships in home country, as well as in the new country, as a way of promoting greater integration and adaptation and addressing past trauma. So one of the things we've developed within Children's Hospital is a support group called La Monarca, standing monarch butterfly, and it's a resilience-focused support group that lasts 10 weeks, servicing kids between 12 and 18 years of age. And we go through these different topics every week, everything from just giving trauma psychoeducation, right, helping them understand why it is they're feeling certain ways, why it's so hard to focus at school, why it's so hard to, you know, build a relationship with sometimes, you know, strangers that they're now connecting and living with. We teach them coping skills. We talk about grief and changes, a culture of stress, and really kind of building up their sense of self-efficacy at the end by talking about hopes and dreams. And this is for youth and caregivers. So we've now gone through several cycles of this. And we're so thankful to CCF funding because through their support, we've now are beginning to just pilot out some data. And so the CCF funding helped us to translate a lot of consent forms, satisfaction surveys focus group guides. We've now done 4 rounds of focus groups with youth and caregivers who participated in our group. We now have that information now transcribed and translated, and it's waiting analysis. So I'm sort of just giving you the preview to what's coming next. But I did want to just share a little bit about what we have going on. And of course, we were able to also compensate youth and families with $25 gift cards. So we have this great set of data now. And this next round, we're actually going to be gathering pre and post pilot data as well. So I hope to be invited next year and we'll have more actual data. And I just want to acknowledge a few others in my team who are really, working hard to support this research as well. So thank you, and I'll stop for questions.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Joyce, did you want to share your comment with the group and maybe?
Oh, hi. So hi, Natalie. So I know Dr. Cruz. Just wanted to thank you for all you do in La Lanterna. And it's great to know that there is this support group that I'm happy to send more of our families to now that I know. Is it required to be in La Lanterna first before able to be able to go into the support group?
Oh, Joyce, thank you for that question. And no, it is not a requirement. We do take any 12 to 18 year olds who have recently migrated, which we've now defined as within the 5 years. Yeah, so please send over names. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? So do you think that so you're working within Ultimed Clinic at CHLA, but are there other places where you think you could find, I don't know if we say get referrals is the right word, or find participants? What are the other places that you would like,
great.
if you could?
Great question. We do have some collaborations with different community organizations in the area. So Esperanza Legal Rights, for example, Nuevo Amanecer, that helps kind of link youth with sponsors, or resource parents is what they're called. So we have several different community mental health agencies, and we also have plans to join a community fair that's coming up in June for specifically migrants from Central America. So there's a few different kind of community programs that we've affiliated with.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like it's probably one of those things that there's probably a lot of people who would benefit who just don't know about it yet. And yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, Dorian put the comment in the chat that we love clinicians, and that's true. We equally love clinicians, researchers, students, trainees, everybody.
Thank you. Well, I'm inspired by everyone's research here. Again, I'm primarily a clinician and I'm just beginning to dabble more into research. So I'm inspired by what everyone here is doing as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, yeah, we definitely look forward to hearing about the results in future years. So
I did have one quick question. Was the curriculum for La Monarca, was that developed from something else, or did you guys create it originally?
Gabe, that's a great question. It's inspired by sort of TFCBT, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That's kind of the gold star for addressing trauma in youth and adolescents. And then we sort of adapted it to kind of the challenges that we tend to see coming up and added more of this culturally affirming kind of perspective. So, including some of the elements and topics that we hear coming up a lot more, like the acculturative stress, feeling discriminated at school, challenges of, not knowing the language, and the constant fear of detention, deportation, all of those things. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Excellent. Okay, Joyce, you're up next.
All right. Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. righty, and I have to do presentation. All right, are you guys able to see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. All right, good afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm going to tell you about our project, Increasing the Reach of Virtual Positive Parenting Programs in the Philippines. This is just a picture of City Hall when they lit it up in the colors of the Filipino flag during Filipino American History Month. I acknowledge that I live and work on the historical and current homeland of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, and I recognize the long history of genocide and land theft used to create the state of California and the United States. First of all, I wanted to really thank the Center for Changing Family. It's been nice to find other researchers in different disciplines. And one thing that, in addition to this funding, there was a call out to see if anyone wanted to write about parenting and immigration. And so I was able to work with the conversation on the topic of kind of bridging that cultural gap. And again, just wanted to thank Center for Changing Family. And this has helped me try to kind of address in a different way, the increasing Asian hate and Asian discrimination that's been happening more recently during the pandemic. All right, so let's jump right in. I am going to just talk a lot about just the story behind my work, our experiencing moving during the pandemic to virtual online parenting implementation, and then talk about our work in progress for the study that's funded by this grant. I am a Filipina immigrant, grew up here in historic Filipino town, which is where many of my community partners are. And this work called the Filipino Family Health Initiative has been working to prevent adolescent suicide and depression in the Filipino community for over 10 years now. We have a lot of trainees who work with us, and I feel grateful for all the mentors who've mentored me. And so very important to kind of pay it forward. And this work would not be possible without the many families who participated in our workshops over the years. I think it's very strong, very important to look at where we came from before we know where we'll get to our destination. So growing up in a Filipino immigrant family, I saw a lot of risky behaviors among teens, including suicide and cutting and depression. So I became a pediatrician and a public health researcher to really address this issue. Filipinos are the third largest Asian subgroup in the US and the largest in California. LA has over 500,000, and they're one of the least studied Asian subgroups due to aggregation of Asian subgroups in research. They're often called an invisible minority. I'm going to skip over this. So we use community-based participatory research to ask the community, how can we address these mental health issues in the Filipino community? And they recommended to use the incredible years during the school age years to help prevent these risky behaviors. And so what we've done over the decade is really implement a preventive version of Incredible Years. And first we did it in person, but now we moved over virtually during the pandemic. And we measure parenting practices, parenting stress, and internalizing and externalizing behaviors, as well as child depression and child anxiety. One of our more recent studies of offering online parenting in California is described here in this consort diagram, but basically parents are randomized to either do the program right away or 3 months later. And this is the same model that we're using in the study funded by this grant. In our work, we found that it does increase praise and clear expectation among parents, and it has actually decreased child-reported anxiety, depression, and internalizing behaviors. So this grant has helped us reach the Philippines now. Youth suicide is on the rise there as well, in addition to here in the US. And 1 in 4 Filipinos ages 13 to 17 have seriously thought about committing suicide. We know that there's protective factors, which including building that parent-child relationship and decreasing family conflict. And so work in progress. It's taken us a while to develop partnerships in different parts of the Philippines. We've done a lot of informational webinars, as well as outreach via social media. The Philippines is one of the most connected countries in the world on social media, and we're lucky to have that. We're also working with the Filipino Women's Network, where I presented some of our work there.
And you're
So far, I have a timer for myself. So we've outreached to 30 families, and we're in the process of screening all of them. And to date, we've completed 8 baseline surveys. And these are just some quotes from our previous parents who've done our program here in the US. And like many of you here, our objective is just to really improve positive childhood experiences. And one shout out, this funding actually helped fund one of my research assistants who is a LAUSD grad and an Irvine alum. And I'm proud to say he is going to go to a PhD program at the University of Maryland to work with Dr. Teresa Chia. So that's a wonderful outcome that's come out of this funding. So I really, really am grateful for it.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to your trainee. That's wonderful. All right, questions, comments?
This is actually my first international study, so it's been a really steep learning curve.
Yeah. Have you traveled back and forth then to the Philippines to get things going, or you've done it all from here?
No, done it all virtually, which is pretty incredible. We also have a Venezuelan pediatrician on my team who's helping us offer incredible years in Spanish. And so our dream is to reach out to Venezuela eventually, but one step at a time. Yeah,
that's great. I just, so you know, couple of the research grants I've had through the Fogarty International Center, they're partnerships between US institutions and institutions in low and middle income countries. So if I'm happy to talk with you more about that process.
Thank you. Yeah, I just submitted an R01 to do the incredible years like here in California, and I've been thinking like, well, how do we, use this pilot funding to apply for larger grants? So that is on my list to figure out how the NIH funds international work. Yeah. All right, Cynthia, yeah, do at-risk behaviors stem primarily from cultural factors or other factors? I wish I knew the magic bullet. The work that I've done is basically by asking the community here in LA, what are the factors here? So I do think you need to kind of look at your particular population to see what the specific risk factors are here. But definitely, I think there is that kind of cultural barrier, the stigma, not only associated with mental health, but also the stigma associated with having to go to a parenting workshop is also something that we're trying to overcome. So yeah, I think, and in addition to culture, I think also just kind of racism and discrimination, the more we can help children feel proud of their culture, the more they have higher self-esteem and better outcomes. So I think that also has to do with kind of the risky behaviors.
Excellent, thank you. And our last 2 presentations, we have Yana and then Alaina, and they're both talking about their projects are linked. So these next 2 projects will be linked together. So Yana, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. Are you able to see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me and Alaina here today. My name is Yana Ryjova. I'm a 5th-year graduate student in the psychology department. And I'm really excited to talk about naturalistic communication in a day in the life of young adult couples and associations with subsequent relationship outcomes. So we know that couple communication is important. In fact, the quality of couples communication has direct association with aggression in the relationship quality, and even broader individual and dyadic health and well-being. Now, much of what we know about couple communication is the result of research based on things like indirect observation, so things like self-reports, or direct observation that has primarily been lab-based. So this begs the question, what happens outside the lab? What happens in the real world? And what happen in the day-to-day at home matter for the broader functioning of the relationship? And that's what this study set out to answer. So this study that I'm presenting had three main goals. First, we wanted to get a sense of what do couples even do on a typical day at home and how do they communicate? Second, we wanted to get a sense of whether there were patterns to find in couples' everyday communication behaviors. And finally, we wanted to see whether couple communication behaviors on one day at home was linked to relationship functioning about 1 year later. So to answer these questions, we recruited a sample of 106 young adult romantic couples for this naturalistic, in the wild study of couples interaction across an entire day at home. So participants were about 22 and a half on average, and were on average together for about 2.5 years. So couples came into the lab, they completed some self-report questionnaires, and then each partner was loaned a smartphone. And these smartphones were programmed to audio record 3-minute segments throughout the day, and about 50% of the day was audio recorded. And after the study, we coded each of those 3-minute audio files for the couple's location, what they were doing, how are they feeling, and a wide range of different communication behaviors. So what we found for our first aim is basically that participants really just truly went about their daily routines, their patterns, and interactions. So unlike in the lab settings, we captured communication in couples' natural environments, like at home, in their car, or even at a restaurant, and across a variety of everyday activities, such as while they were driving, while they were walking, while they were eating. I won't spend too much time here, but for our second aim, we did find that the behaviors that couples showed over the day fit into some broad, meaningful patterns, which included hostile behaviors, withdrawn behaviors, vulnerable behaviors, warm, and playful behaviors. Now, what we find most exciting and a bit surprising about this work is that the communication behaviors couples did in their naturalistic interactions at home, even when sampled on just one random day in their lives, can offer some insight into the future functioning of the relationship. So specifically, we found that hostile behaviors on that one day were linked to increases in aggression in the relationship and decreases in relationship satisfaction about 1 year later. Similarly, for withdrawn behaviors, we found that more of the withdrawn behaviors were associated with increased aggression, decreased relationship satisfaction, and even an increased likelihood that the couple would break up by follow-up. Interestingly, we didn't find any associations between vulnerability at home and subsequent relationship outcomes. And then for the positive things, we found that both warm and playful behaviors reduce the likelihood that the couple would break up by follow-up. So ultimately, this study fills an important gap in the literature. We show the longitudinal associations between communication behaviors in couples' natural everyday lives and their future relationship outcomes. And we hope that this work can also inform couple and family intervention efforts. And finally, we really want to acknowledge a huge thank you to our lab members and collaborators, our participants, as well as the Center for the Changing Family that allowed us to really push hard this past summer to finish coding this work. So we were able to fund a number of research assistants to support us with coding all of this data that we had. So yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Questions or comments?
Hi, I have a question if that's okay. I was interested in how you coded the behaviors. So were you interested in like tone or like looking for keywords, or kind of just how you coded into those kind of specific warm versus hostile? I'd be really interested to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we, had all these 3-minute audio snippets. We first transcribed them so that we could get a sense of what the couples were communicating about. And then really we listened to each of those audio files and coded, I think we had 28 different communication behaviors we were coding for. So we coded for different types of tone of voice. So like hostile tone of voice or warm tone of voice, and a really wide variety of behaviors. So like, was there any insulting happening in that audio file? Were there any words of affirmation being used? So each of those clips were coded across those 28 communication dimensions, which then we kind of distilled down to those 5 broader categories.
So I was just reflecting on my own research experience in pediatrics, and we are mandated reporters, and we have to so there's that, and I'm imagining that that would have to factor into your work as well, that if you heard some sort of, I guess it would be abusive situation, because you were transcribing and analyzing later, did that, like, what were your requirements in a case like that?
Yeah, I think our team was really thoughtful about that before getting started with the data collection. Thankfully, we didn't run into those issues as much as we had thought. Most of our participants were not parents, so there usually wasn't children in the home. It was just the partners. And most of the time there was some hostility or some conflict going on between partners, but most of it was kind of the day-to-day type of conflict that most couples experience. So we didn't seem to run into a lot of risk issues.
Yeah, but I imagine there was a plan in place if there was some sort of serious issue of how your team would respond to that.
Yeah. If I can just chime in, since I'm PI in the larger project, we don't have the same mandated requirements for domestic violence as child abuse or elder abuse, which is not to say that we wouldn't pay attention to risk if we thought somebody was in some kind of immediate risk of harm to themselves or somebody else. But it's the mandated for domestic violence is actually somewhat different for us.
Okay. And I also realize that you're analyzing the data much later, so it's not an immediate response type of situation. But I was just curious about that. Thank you. And Cynthia asked, did you consider the risk of self-selection in the study? Couples who are more likely to have bad interactions are less likely to participate.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's definitely a limitation that we're writing about as we write up this manuscript. But we were really surprised to find that a lot of couples kind of forgot all about us. We really were a fly on the wall, and most couples had some amount of negative interaction during the day or some amount of conflict. But we agree that probably certain couples who are maybe more aggressive would be less likely to choose to participate.
Great, thank you. Okay, and we will move on to Alaina to wrap us up for the day.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to be building on the study that Yana just shared about. So today I'll be sharing some exciting results from the project, but instead investigating the ways that individual attachment styles can impact the dyadic communication at home. So while a lot of attention has certainly been paid to the importance of attachment styles, the experience of navigating day-to-day life as a couple, with individual and dyadic pre-existing strengths and vulnerabilities, it really heightens the importance of understanding how attachment influences communication in the home. So what do we already know? We know that attachment styles, which first developed throughout early caregiving relationships, are critical in shaping the development and the functioning of behaviors and attitudes in romantic relationships. We also know that secure attachment is positively associated with psychological well-being, positive affect and mood, and relationship satisfaction. And there are many reasons thought to be relevant, such as different emotion regulation strategies, stress responses, and different sources of social support. When we think specifically about how attachment impacts couples communication, past work has shown that securely attached people are more likely to engage in responsive self-disclosure, and that avoidantly attached people are more likely to engage in demand withdrawal patterns. So broadly, we also know from in-lab research on couples that attachment is a key predictor of conflict style and behaviors, heightening the importance of this. So again, what about at home? And given those nuances of couples' daily life with various tasks and stressors, it makes sense that this is a salient context in which to investigate ways that attachment impacts communication. So specifically in the present study, we'll be asking, are anxious and avoidant attachment associated with one's own communication? And are there cross-partner effects such that his attachment style impacts her communication and vice versa? So again, we're using 106 young adult dating couples. I'm using the same communication measures that Yana detailed. And then for attachment, we're using a self-report questionnaire called Experiences in Close Relationships. And to do this, we're going to be using actor-partner interdependence models, which I'll walk you through in just a sec. So here you'll see the first APIM model. And we see that when considering the within person or actor effects, women's but not men's anxious attachment is associated with vulnerability at home. So the more anxiously attached I am, the more vulnerable communication I will use in the home. When we consider partner effects, we see that again, women's but not men's anxious attachment influences their partner's vulnerable communication, such that the more anxiously attached I am, the more vulnerable communication my partner will use at home. We also see these cross-partner effects for hostility or hostile communication. And again, only for women, you can see that her anxious attachment is positively associated with his use of hostile communication at home. So when we turn our attention to avoidant attachment, we actually see that avoidant attachment, counter to hypotheses, is not associated with one's own or one's partner's communication. So putting it all together, emerging adults are tasked with the development of competencies needed for mature adult intimacy. And often these early relationships represent the first transition from a primary attachment figure. And the findings highlighted here really underscore the importance of considering anxious attachment when considering the ways that couples talk to each other on a day-to-day basis. And we think that women's anxious attachment might be associated with vulnerability, as things like fear of rejection can tend to generate the need for reassurance or more emotionally laden, vulnerable topics throughout the day. And although this is a nuanced process, her anxious attachment may also work to, in time, create a couple's environment with more hostility due to ongoing patterns resulting in things like punishing the partner or worse conflict resolution, which would lead to that evidence of his greater hostility. However, future studies should investigate these patterns with attention to the process unfolding over time and replicate the gender findings we see here. So broadly, we want to extend, again, a really huge thank you to our lab members and collaborators, research participants, and again to the Center for the Changing Family for enabling us to finish this coded data over the summer and answer some of these really exciting questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments for Alaina?
Cynthia, yeah, these were all, everything presented in my study and Yana's study are heterosexual couples. We collected, I think it was 3 or 4 same-sex couples, which unfortunately wasn't a meaningful enough sample size to detect any differences. I think that they certainly could change, and that's a huge area of research that's still needed. And I agree, it would be so wonderful if we could then say, and we have 106 female-female couples and 106 male-male couples, or even non-binary. There's such an attention needed to different presentations and sexualities and combinations of families. But again, that's kind of the trickiness of this kind of data. It takes so many years to code it and get the funding and recruit everybody. So that's definitely an area of future research. Thanks for that question.
Other questions, comments?
I will say it's certainly tempting for us to do a case report or something for just the small sample of same-sex couples, but I think we'd be too tempted to generalize or to draw conclusions that are far broader than we should, but it is tempting when we have some of that data.
Maybe it's really great pilot data for the next grant.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have a quick question. I noticed, Gayla, this is probably for you. One of the funding sources on there was NSF. What part of the work was NSF funding? So
this is a complicated mini-stage project. But NSF was actually a really, really big part. And we actually had 2, well, I want to give a shout out to a prior graduate student who's now, Adela Timmons, who's now at UT Austin. And she actually, as a graduate student, decided all of our in-lab, because we were collecting all of our observations in lab, that she wanted to do this at home research. And she partnered with people in engineering to actually figure out how we were going to collect the data, because some of the devices that are now available were not available when we started.
Yeah.
Anyway, NSF then funded a project that I submitted that was looking at the integration of physiological signals, both heart rate and electrodermal, with these audio recordings with the participant self-reports. And so that piece really is what NSF was interested in.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you all. I think this was very successful. It was really interesting to hear about the different projects, all related to the CCF and its mission and vision. Thank you, all of you, for your hard work on all of these projects and for spending time sharing with us today, and look forward to hearing more results in future iterations of this roundtable. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your Monday.